Why people secretly judge. Have you ever walked away from a conversation wondering, did I say something wrong? Were they judging me? Or maybe you've caught someone looking at you for just a second too long and instantly started wondering what they were thinking. Here's the truth. Whether we like it or not, people judge each other within seconds of meeting. Long before you finished introducing yourself, the human brain has already started forming opinions about your confidence, your trustworthiness, your intelligence, and even your social status. But here's what most people don't realize. Those first judgments are often automatic, unconscious, and surprisingly inaccurate. Your brain makes them before you, or anyone else, has enough information to know the truth. So why does the human mind judge people so quickly? What exactly are people noticing about you? And is there any way to change the impression you leave behind? By the end of this video, you'll understand the psychology behind first impressions, why people secretly judge others, the hidden mental shortcuts your brain uses every day, and how becoming aware of them can completely change the way you see yourself and everyone around you. Welcome back to the channel, or if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm a psychologist, and today we're going to explore one of the most misunderstood parts of human behavior: why people secretly judge you, often without even realizing they're doing it. We'll look at the psychology behind first impressions, the science of unconscious bias, a real story from my practice, and several research-backed insights that can help you understand what really happens in the first few moments of meeting someone. If you're interested in understanding the hidden mechanics of the human mind, make sure you're subscribed, because every week we explore the psychology behind behavior, emotions, relationships, and the invisible forces that shape our everyday lives. Now, let's begin with a simple question. Why is the human brain so quick to judge? Researchers studying social cognition have found something that should fundamentally change how you think about other people. The human brain forms a snap judgment about another person within roughly 1/10 of a second of seeing their face, faster than you can consciously register a single complete thought. 1/10 of a second. That means most of the judging happening around you isn't careful, deliberate evaluation at all. It's an automatic, almost reflexive process most people aren't even aware they're running. This goes back to something researchers call rapid social categorization. Within that first fraction of a second of seeing someone, your brain has already started making automatic assessments. Friend or foe, trustworthy or not, similar to me or different from me. This isn't a personal flaw. It's an evolutionary holdover for most of human history. Quickly assessing whether a stranger was a threat had genuine survival value. Hesitating too long to categorize an unfamiliar person could be costly. The problem is that this same lightning-fast system is still running today, except now it's firing on a stranger's clothing, accent, tone of voice, or even just a passing facial expression, generating snap judgments that have absolutely nothing to do with someone's actual character or competence. Here's where it gets more specific, because there's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the fundamental attribution error, and it explains a huge amount of why judgment feels so unfair from the receiving end. When we observe someone else's behavior, we tend to attribute it to their personality or character. She's rude, he's lazy, rather than to their circumstances. Maybe she just received terrible news. Maybe he's exhausted from working a double shift. But when we examine our own behavior, we do the exact opposite. We readily attribute our own mistakes to circumstances. I was rude because I was stressed. I was late because traffic was terrible. This asymmetry means that the judgment you're imagining other people forming about you is very likely harsher and more character-based than the judgment they'd actually apply to themselves in your exact same situation. There's also something called the spotlight effect that compounds this fear significantly. Research has consistently shown that people dramatically overestimate how much others notice and remember about them. In one well-known set of studies, participants were asked to wear a deliberately embarrassing shirt into a room and then estimate how many people had noticed it, and they consistently overestimated that number, often by double or more. Your own mind places you at the absolute center of every room you walk into, because from your perspective, you are the center of your own experience. But that internal sense is not an accurate map of how much space you actually occupy in everyone else's head. Most people are simply too absorbed in their own internal monologue, their own worries, their own deadlines, to be cataloguing your every move with the intensity your anxious mind insists they are. And then there's a more uncomfortable truth worth naming directly. Sometimes people genuinely are judging you, and understanding why that happens takes away much of its sting. Research on something called projection shows that people are especially quick to judge harshly in others the exact traits or behaviours they're most insecure about in themselves. Someone who privately fears they're not successful enough may be unusually critical of others' career choices. Someone anxious about their own parenting may judge other parents more sharply than warranted. This doesn't mean every judgment you encounter is purely projection, but it does mean that a significant portion of the judgment circulating around any room has far more to do with the judge's own internal insecurities than with anything you actually did. If any of this is landing for you, go ahead and drop a comment telling me whether you struggle more with fearing judgment or catching yourself judging others too quickly. I read through these regularly. And if this video is reframing something for you already, take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this reach more people who need to hear it. I want to tell you about a patient I worked with. I'll call her Yvonne. She was 31 years old, a nurse who came to me convinced that her co-workers thought she was incompetent, based largely on one moment where a senior colleague had briefly raised an eyebrow during a shift handoff. Yvonne had replayed that single eyebrow raise for weeks, building an entire narrative around it, certain it confirmed what she'd always privately feared about herself. When we examined it together, what emerged was that Yvonne couldn't actually recall any specific words the colleague had said, only the expression itself, which her own anxious mind had filled with a meaning that may never have been there at all. As it turned out, that particular colleague was, by multiple accounts, simply a tired, often distracted person whose expressions rarely reflected anything specific about the person standing in front of them. Once Yvonne understood that her certainty about being judged was very likely her own fundamental attribution error and spotlight effect working together, rather than an accurate read of reality, something genuinely shifted, and within weeks she described feeling noticeably lighter, walking into shifts that used to fill her with dread. So here's what actually helps with this. The first tool is what I call the evidence check. When you feel certain someone is judging you harshly, pause and ask yourself, what is the actual observable evidence for this, separate entirely from how I feel in this moment? You'll often find the emotional certainty is wildly disproportionate to the thin, ambiguous evidence actually available. The second tool is deliberately recalling the fundamental attribution error in reverse. When you catch yourself judging someone else's behaviour harshly, pause and generate at least one plausible circumstantial explanation before settling on a character judgment. This single habit, practiced consistently, tends to soften your overall judgment of others, which, in turn, makes it easier to extend that same grace to yourself. The third tool addresses the spotlight effect directly, reminding yourself explicitly that the people around you are as absorbed in their own internal experience as you are in yours. Most people you encounter today are thinking primarily about their own worries, not quietly cataloguing the details of your behaviour the way your anxious mind insists they are. Now, an important caution here. Understanding these patterns is genuinely useful for the everyday fear of judgment most people experience. But if this fear has grown severe enough that it's significantly limiting your work, your relationships, or your willingness to leave the house, that's a sign worth bringing directly to a licensed mental health professional, because there may be an underlying social anxiety that benefits from structured clinical support, and reaching out for that support is a sign of strength, not weakness. So let's bring this together. Judgment forms automatically and almost instantly, often shaped far more by the judge's own insecurities and circumstances than by anything you actually did. And the fear of being judged is frequently amplified by the spotlight effect, your own mind dramatically overestimating how much space you occupy in other people's thoughts. Once you understand these mechanisms, you can start checking the actual evidence behind your fear of judgment, extending other people the same circumstantial grace you'd want, extended to yourself, and remembering that most people are simply too busy living inside their own head to be living inside yours. If this video changed how you think about judgment, I have a follow-up video right after this one on exactly how chronic stress reshapes the brain over time, and I think you'll find it just as worth your time, so go ahead and click through to that next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what's coming. And if someone in your life needs to hear this today, take a moment to send it their way. If you're struggling, please don't hesitate to reach out to one. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.